People love to say it must be so great being your own boss. And I get it. From the outside, entrepreneurship looks like freedom. No boss, no time clock, no one approving your vacation, no one telling you what to do. But here's what no one tells you. When you start a business, you don't get rid of bosses. You multiply them. Suddenly, the bank has an opinion, customers have opinions, vendors have opinions, employees need answers, the tax collector wants a piece, the landlord wants rent, the economy gets a vote, and somehow every problem eventually finds its way back to your desk. So, yeah, I became my own boss. Then I discovered I had more bosses than ever before. Welcome to Lessons from a Reluctant Entrepreneur. This is a new series based on anecdotes from my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable. The book is not a textbook. It's not a how-to manual. It's more like a how-not-to manual. It's not a business guru's 7-step plan to becoming wildly successful while working 4 hours a week from a beach somewhere. It's a story, my story. It's the story of how I started a company when I had no real plan to become an entrepreneur. I had a product idea, I had passion, I had energy, I certainly had ego, I had a pretty poor understanding of risk, and in many ways, that combination was just dangerous enough to get me started. Over the years, I made good decisions, bad decisions, lots of bad decisions, lucky decisions, fear-based decisions, and decisions I only understood decades later. In this series, I'm going to pull out some of those stories and talk about the lessons behind them. Not because I think my path is the path, it isn't, but sometimes hearing what someone else got wrong can help us see our own situation a little more clearly. So, let's begin with one of the biggest myths in entrepreneurship, the myth of being your own boss. One of the most common things people say to entrepreneurs is, it must be great being your own boss. And I understand why people say it. From the outside, entrepreneur can look like freedom. No one tells you when to show up. No one tells you when to leave. No one approves your vacation request. No one stands over your shoulder asking why you're 5 minutes late. No one gives you an annual review. No one tells you what you're worth, what your title is, and whether you're allowed to make a decision. From the outside, that actually sounds pretty good. But from the inside, it looks very different. In the book, I write about this misconception. Entrepreneurs often hear how others envy the supposed ease and freedom of owning a business. But anyone who has actually gone down that road knows that being your own boss is mostly a myth. You may not have a boss anymore. Instead, you have many. Banks, vendors, customers, employees, governments, tax collectors, economies, and sometimes even the weather all get a vote. That's the part people don't see. They see the title, founder, president, CEO, owner. They don't always see the weight that comes with it. When you own your own business, the buck really does stop with you, and sometimes so does the cash. If payroll is due and the bank account is thin, that's your problem. If a customer is angry, that's your problem. If a vendor needs to be paid, that's your problem. If the economy falls apart, that's your problem. If an employee makes a mistake, yeah, you got it. That's your problem. If you make a mistake, that's definitely your problem. And here's the funny part. When you're struggling, some people see you as a failure. When you succeed, some people assume it was way too easy. I wrote about that too. Business journeys are filled with disappointments, fear, obstacles, self-judgment, and moments that look like failure at the time. But those are the parts that often create the business. When I started my company, I didn't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to build a company because I want to be my own boss. That was not the motivation. I had a product idea. I believed in it. My employer didn't. So eventually, I reached the conclusion that the only way to bring that product into the world was to build the company around it. At the time, I thought the hard part would be designing the product. I was wrong. Designing the product was the fun part. The hard part was everything else. The hard part was learning that a business is not just a product. A business is a living organism. It needs oxygen, food, care, discipline, structure, and attention. Ignore one part long enough and the whole thing can get sick. And in those early days, I learned very quickly that I had not escaped having a boss. I simply had traded one boss for a long list of new ones. The bank became a boss. When I needed money, the bank decided whether I was worthy of receiving it. Later, when I had a line of credit, the bank influenced how I ran the company. I wanted the financial statements to look good enough to keep the banker happy. That affected decisions. That affected timing. That affected how I viewed profit. That affected how I viewed risk. Customers became bosses. A customer could call with a problem and suddenly the entire day changed. A customer could delay payment and suddenly cash flow changed. A customer could demand a discount and suddenly profitability changed. A customer could threaten to buy from a competitor and suddenly fear entered the room. Vendors became bosses. If we owed them money, they had leverage. If we needed parts, they had leverage. If they changed pricing, delivery, quality, or terms, we had to respond. Employees became bosses. Now, that might sound strange, but anyone who's owned a business knows exactly what I mean. Employees depend on the business for their livelihood. They have families, mortgages, rent, car payments, children, dreams, problems. When you sign the front of the paycheck, you carry the weight of the people who receive the paycheck. And then there are government agencies, taxes, regulations, insurance, landlords, attorneys, accountants, competitors, supply chains, recessions, pandemics, and every other force that has absolutely no interest in whether you had other plans that day. So, are you really your own boss? Not exactly. You may own the company, but you don't own the circumstances surrounding the company. And that was a hard lesson for me. Maybe the better question is not, do I want to be my own boss? Maybe the better question is, am I willing to be responsible when there is no boss to blame? And that is a very different question. Because when you're an employee, there's usually someone above you. Maybe they made a bad decision. Maybe they set a bad policy. Maybe they created the problem. Maybe they failed to communicate. Maybe they failed to lead. When you own the business, that comfort disappears. You can still blame others. Plenty of business owners do. You blame customers, you blame employees, you blame the bank, you blame the economy, you blame the competitors, you blame the government, and sometimes you may be right. But even when you're right, it may not matter because the business is still yours. The responsibility is still yours. The decision is still yours. That's one of the great paradoxes of entrepreneurship. You may not control everything, but you're responsible for responding to almost everything. That can feel unfair. It can also be incredibly empowering because once you stop believing that entrepreneurship is about freedom from responsibility, you can begin to understand that it is actually about freedom through responsibility. Those are not the same thing. Freedom from responsibility says, I don't want anyone telling me what to do. Freedom through responsibility says, I accept that the outcome is mine to influence. And that shift matters. Early in my entrepreneurial journey, I was driven by passion, ego, fear, anger, and the need to prove something. But don't get me wrong, some of those traits helped me start the company. Some of them nearly hurt the company later. I write in the book that entrepreneurs often make decisions based on what they know at the time, influenced by fear, anger, ego, gut, and instinct. We leave the safety of a job for the uncertainty of entrepreneurship. Others may see us as risk takers, but we often see ourselves as reward seekers. And that's important. Most entrepreneurs don't start with perfect information. They start with a belief that something can be better, a belief that something should exist, a belief that they can build it, a belief that the risk is worth it. But belief is not the same as freedom. Belief gets you started. Responsibility keeps you going. And over time, I realized that the freedom I thought I wanted was not the freedom I actually needed. I thought freedom meant control. I thought freedom meant getting my way. I thought freedom meant making the decisions. But real freedom came much later. It came when I learned to build a team. It came when I learned to say no. It came when I learned that not every customer should be my customer. It came when I learned that revenue is not the same as profit. It came when I learned that being busy is not the same as being effective. It came when I learned that I didn't have to chase every order, attend every trade show, answer every challenge, win every argument, or prove every critic wrong. Real freedom did not come from being the boss. Real freedom came from becoming less attached to being the boss. I know that may sound strange, but it was true for me. In the beginning, I wanted control because I was afraid of failing, afraid of being wrong, afraid of losing customers, afraid of losing employees, afraid of running out of money, afraid that the whole thing would collapse if I wasn't holding it together with both hands. But a business that depends entirely on one person is not really free. It's trapped, and so is the owner. If the owner can't step away, the owner is not free. If the owner must approve every decision, the owner is not free. If the owner is the only person who can solve every problem, the owner is not free. If the owner is consistently reacting to fear, the owner is not free. That was a humbling realization because for a long time I thought I was building a business. In reality, I was building a job, a stressful job, a demanding job, a job with no time clock, no guaranteed paycheck, no overtime, and no one to blame when things went wrong. Yes, I had the title. Yes, I had the office. Yes, I had the authority. But authority and freedom are not the same thing. That's the myth. Being your own boss does not automatically create freedom. In fact, in the early years, it may create the opposite. It may create more pressure, more risk, more responsibility, more sleepless nights, more difficult conversations, more moments when you stare into the dark and wonder, what in the world did you get yourself into? But that doesn't mean entrepreneurship is bad. Far from it. Entrepreneurship can be one of the most rewarding journeys a person can take. It forces growth. It exposes weakness. It challenges assumptions. It reveals character. It creates opportunities to serve customers, employ people, solve problems, and build something that didn't exist before. But it's not easy. And it's not the fantasy many people imagine. So the next time someone says, it must be great being your own boss, maybe the response should be, yeah, but not in the way you think. Because the real reward is not that nobody tells you what to do. The real reward is that the journey forces you to become someone capable of making better decisions, someone capable of carrying responsibility, someone capable of learning from mistakes, someone capable of letting go, someone capable of building something that can eventually stand without you holding it up every minute of the day. That is where freedom begins. Not when you become your own boss, but when you become the kind of leader your business actually needs. That's the first lesson from the reluctant entrepreneur. Being your own boss is mostly a myth. Entrepreneurship doesn't eliminate bosses, it multiplies them. But if you stay with the process long enough, and if you're willing to learn from the pressure instead of just complaining about it, the journey can transform you. In the next episode of Lessons from a Reluctant Entrepreneur, we'll talk about another dangerous assumption, risk versus reward. Because sometimes what looks like courage may actually be a very bad bet. Thanks for being here. I'll see you again soon on the next episode.